Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Monday Motivation. I'm your host, Daniel Krakowski, joined, as always, by Papa Bear.
Papa Bear.
Goran Vazovic.
That's right.
Say what's up to the people.
What's up, people?
Also joining us today, we're joined by none other than one of my oldest friends of all time, Shawn Worthington. How are you doing, Shawn?
It's good to be with you, good buddy.
Thanks, man. So Shawn was in town visiting.
How do you guys know each other?
From the way back.
Yeah, elementary school we're talking about.
Wow.
So
Back in the early 2000s?
Yeah.
Yep, riding the school bus together. School bus warriors.
Long or short bus?
It would. Well played.
Slade.
Yeah. I have no further comments.
All right, we have a lot of work to do.
But anyway, Shawn was in town, and I thought it would be a good opportunity just to spend some more time with him to try and bring him into work. And, we had some lunch. It was a good time. He, of course, co-opted the lunch. We all had shots during lunch, which is a rare occasion for it. Go ahead.
It's a wet lunch, right?
This is
a perfectly acceptable business practice, right?
Correct. Yeah. So one drink, we were very responsible with that.
It's Friday, my day, yeah?
That's a very good point.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you were like, hey, let's do the Monday Motivation. He's like, what the hell's that?
Yeah, no, he was an avid listener. Bookmarks it. Listen to every episode, I'm sure.
This is my motivation. This podcast.
This is all he's got.
I'm living my motivation right now.
So the reason why I thought Shawn would be such a good guest in general is, can you give us a little bit of your background, what you're doing right now, professionally, career-wise, academically?
Yeah, gladly. So I'm 2.5 years into a 5-year PhD program in English literature, going for my doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania.
I hear that's a pretty good school. I hear they know a thing or two about a thing or two.
I'm lucky. I feel blessed every day because of the faculty that I get to work with, as well as my peers. All really talented people. So, just even dive into the motivation in a little bit. One of my big motives is to try to be an excellent part of that academic community and contribute intellectually to what's going on there.
Right.
And that's just taking some personal responsibility for my own methods and my own practice. And the workplace can be a place where you can feel like you put what you have on display, right?
Right.
In a kind of safe space, ideally. We can't always choose where we work, but where we work can be one sign of...
Sure you can.
Yeah, I mean...
You can choose where not to work.
You can choose where not to work, but some people have fewer options than others.
Right.
And
yeah, not everyone is as privileged as Daniel Krakowski here.
Exactly. I mean, you have a certain amount of pull at your own company, right?
Yes.
And
he is the pull, the Krakowski Corporation.
That's but just to broaden out a little bit, some people don't have those options, but that can be a real sort of way of taking an inventory of where you are in your career, how you feel in your workplace and with your peers, and feeling as if you have something to contribute to this environment and they're contributing as well can be something that really propels you forward career-wise. Yeah.
So when looking at an academic career, which is one that I know that you're definitely considering and are pursuing as a student right now, but also doing some teaching as well, right? The reward systems and structures aren't the same as they are in most businesses, where it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation between success and doing a good job and some sort of capital reward. So, we talk a lot about on the podcast different types of, identifying your purpose and what your goal is, what is going to add value to your life. Right. So I think it's great because a lot of the people we speak to are investors or involved in business to some capacity.
Have their own businesses.
So, did you go through that process? Did you find some greater purpose that you're looking to share and be able to, that really excites you and keeps you going? Because this is a grind, right?
Yeah, definitely. So what's the payoff? I think
right.
One version of the question you're asking, and
much more concise.
Anyone gets into academia for the money is barking up the wrong tree. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of capital to gain in this line of work. Look, man, I could get sentimental about it and say I love the teaching, I love imparting knowledge, and that would be true. I believe in something called, a vocation, right? A calling, right? Mm-hmm. You're being summoned into something. Maybe you don't fully understand the forces that are propelling you into this line of work, and maybe financial payoff kind of takes a back seat when you're swept up into this current. We get into thinking about the artist, right? Why an artist does what he or she does, why they choose that vocation. People have different reasons for that. For me, man, I'm sort of following up on what I've always done well, which is a really kind of basic way forward. It's reading and writing. Always in school, those were the things that I excelled at. So I just followed my skill set, I think, mostly, and tried to capitalize on what would take me forward into the professional world and give me the most satisfaction doing so.
I would argue that it's likely deeper than that, though, mm-hmm. because there has to be more of a reward system than simply what you're good at. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Number one, what you're good at needs to be some sort of marketable skill. So there's a component to that. But I would think that at some point there's some part of what you're doing that you connect with, which is why you're good at it mm-hmm. as well. So it's the thought of, is it really just sharing mm-hmm. information with others? Is there a message that you want to get across? Like, I usually think that there's some deeper underlying why behind, mm-hmm. A statement like that. Have you thought about that at all?
All right, so we can think about teaching and in the classroom. I happen to be at a very privileged institution right now. The undergraduates are extremely smart. It's a thrill to teach the Penn undergraduate because, in part, they're going to go out into the world as a motivated, knowledgeable individual. And enact some sort of social presence out there. They're going to have an effect. And if I can sort of push them into thinking this way or that about an issue, change their mind, change their perspective, enrich their worldview in this way, that to me is tangible, right? Mm-hmm. That's putting something practical in the world. And let's say you're lucky enough to have a teaching career, you might encounter sort of thousands of students over the course of your professional life. And it's hard to say what exactly you're putting out into the world, but that is exhilarating to me, that line of work. And of all the things an academic specializing in English literature is expected to do, reading, writing, and teaching to me has the most sort of practical poignancy and does fuel me. Yeah,
I can see. I think a lot of us are, we kind of, rage in the darkness to create some sort of legacy or create some sort of permanence to make sense of the impermanence of our life. And a lot of us elect the simplest way, which is to have children, or we create our own immortality. And it seems like a good teacher, and one who's principled, and one who's very, very passionate about the subject in which they teach, kind of gets to experience that on a much larger scale than most other people do. And when you take that idea and if you apply it to business, for example, we definitely are talking about this a lot more now, and I'm definitely looking at my business a lot differently. And it's more about creating a community and creating one that's going to help others succeed in what they're looking to do. And sure, we might be, I have the bat signal up in the air, and you have, there's not another superhero, but this part, whatever. But you know what I mean? It's attracting perhaps different people. But the core principle behind it is providing some value to other people so that they can also go out and shape the world as we're trying to for ourselves.
Definitely.
I think there's some overlap there, which is interesting.
Yeah. Look, I come to VSN and I listen to you fellows speak about sort of what you hope to accomplish, and I'm always struck by the awareness you have of social issues, right? Things like wealth inequality, education disparity. Look, if I can help get people who will take positions of power, right, movers and shakers of capital, if I can get them to have that awareness, that is something. That's not nothing. That's towards a kind of social good that I think we can agree on. Community is one word for that, but always with community, the question is sort of who's excluded from this community. And I think that that is part of how VSM speak. Thanks. Not to give you a shameless plug, but
we'll take it.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Pandering to the host.
It's good that you perceive the podcast that way, because that's kind of, it's our intent We don't go into any episode with like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. There's a direct ROI behind this conversation.
Right.
It's more of just like, hey, we're going to dive into deeper subjects other than what we do and see what others pick up. And I'm glad that you picked that up. And, you know, you spoke earlier regarding, you know, the reason what you do, it goes beyond money. And I feel like what we do is also, it goes beyond money. We're here because we're passionate. We found our purpose.
Right.
I have, Daniel has, and, you know, the money is the byproduct. And that's what I think is the most important, no matter what it is. And that's, if that's your purpose, you found it, I feel like, you know, you're going to be more satisfied and happy than somebody that doesn't have the purpose but may have more monetary gains.
Yeah, no, exactly. Finding purpose, I think, is a really important concept. And it's totally what a teacher should be doing for undergraduate students, to help them find something like a purpose going forward. Because when you graduate from college, you know, just sort of to speak to that environment, you get pushed out of the nest. I mean, that's what it feels like. You're suddenly sort of hit in the face with the real world, and you realize that what you're doing before, actually, that has some high stakes. What you're doing every day and the knowledge and the skills that you were gathering, now they're being put to the test. So, look, there's nothing more stark or raw than a confrontation with the real world. And
I think one of my favorite Piaget moments or explanations is he talks about development of children a lot, and he says, you know, a lot of times frustration, that overwhelming fear, a lot of the clients that he's working with who start crying, he's like, the overarching theme of when people become very, very uncomfortable is when there's a breakdown between their operational model of the world and, you know, some situation. So it's like, hey, I want this particular outcome to happen. And, you know, if your action, you know, say and it's just the easiest example, but say you want to make $10 million and you spend 2 years trying to do it and you make $5, that people get frustrated and they feel helpless and they don't know. But beyond just not achieving your goal, he argues that there's some underarching, you know, this overarching, more important, bigger breakdown that's happening, where what they thought would happen, their model of the world to make this money or accomplish this goal, proved to not be true. So now the world in and of itself is in chaos, and they're forced to confront the chaos that exists in the world and the limits of their own knowledge.
Yes, for sure. I think you're getting at it's failure. I think a sense of failure that people fear, right? This is to be avoided, and one big motivation is to avoid the sense of being a failure. If I can quote the great Samuel Beckett, you won't get me out of here with one literary reference. It's fail better, right? And so what does he mean by fail better? No, it's not quite just learn from your mistakes. We should do this, right? But it's also to recognize that in almost everything you're doing and that you will do, there's going to be some degree of failure. So let's be honest with this, right? Let's confront it. And when we do experience failure, how can we move past this in a productive way that doesn't cripple us, right? So the extreme example would be sort of post-2008, right? But after the housing market crashed and the global economy tanked, you had some really high-profile suicides. People felt that they had lost everything, and they had lost themselves, and they had nothing left to live for. So what I'm getting at is sort of a relationship to failure that doesn't involve a total sort of negation or questioning of yourself and your being, right? And maybe this involves sort of disentangling your personal life from your work life, but that's difficult to do. You know, a lot of people are really bound up in their professional life, and that sustains them. So, again, just to bring this back to maybe why I'm doing what I'm doing, a classroom is a space where you're sort of allowed to fail, right? It's safe in that way. And it's not just sort of giving them slack to fail. It's letting them experience what it is to fail, right? And then how to use that as a certain propulsion going forward. I don't know quite what the business analogy would be, but I'm sure in the real estate market you come up against things not going your way.
Often,
yeah.
And there's a lot of, there's a lot of great mentors. Like as there are university great professors, there's also a lot of great mentors.
Yeah, same relationship in a way.
In a way, I mean, more of maybe like a university fellowship type relationship, but there's still some who broadcast it. Gary Vaynerchuk is, for example, like everyone knows Gary V.
Okay.
He is just basically trying to put entrepreneurial advice out to as wide a market as he possibly can, and as such, that also benefits his business.
Right. Just to that point, I think a lot of people equate, just being an entrepreneur as like it's a monetary thing, like you're making money. Or I look at it really just kind of following your passion, following your dreams. And you mentioned like, hey, I really liked and excelled in reading and writing. That's what I chose to be my passion. I think somebody else would have said, that's all great, but it's not producing the money. So I have this fear of not having the money. So I'm just going to do something I hate for the rest of my life just to have the money. Whereas an entrepreneur, I feel like, does what you did. Doing what you truly want to do, no matter the financial outcome.
Right. No, and
that's not to say that, I have plenty of friends who are, they work for NASA, universities. They do really well.
Right.
It's not like you're going to be poor or anything like that.
I mean, a lot of times when we think about motivation, we think about a sort of end goal, right? That that's pulling us towards it, or that we're pushing ourselves towards. Another way to think about motivation, just as an idea, is taking an inventory of our personal traits, attributes, aspects that are allowing us to be on this path in the first place towards this goal. And looking at these as kinds of motors, right, that are propelling us, and checking up on these personal traits every so often, seeing how they grow, seeing how you're growing, how you're changing, how the skills that are equipping you to go forward are evolving, in the short term. This is a little different than having goals, I think, right? This is a process of self-enrichment, which, and
introspection becomes hugely important.
And self-improvement and looking at your sort of personal motors and how they're functioning is a kind of motivation in itself, which maybe isn't goal-oriented so much as sort of an acknowledgement of where you are in the present and how you can grow. And that growth will eventually result in an end goal being fulfilled without all the pressure of that end goal sort of casting back on you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does, because I really enjoy the sentiment of, the disappointment that exists in one's life is the disparity between their actual absolute potential and the potential that they've achieved or accomplished. So, if you could have done great things at this point in your life and you've done nothing, that's where sort of the ennui and the sadness and discontent can come from. That's can be life lasting if you're not able to do something to change it and try and shrink that gap again. And I think that's a pretty similar sentiment to what you were saying. Is that fair?
I think so. Yeah, it's realizing your potential, but also just what you have in the moment where you are, and how you've gotten here, and what you can change about yourself, or what's carrying you forward, and how can we enrich these skills right now, whether it be a passion for teaching, incisive critical writing, and that can be a sort of weekly or monthly check-in on where you are with your skill set, and that in itself, again, is a kind of inertia that will carry you forward, that will offer you some motivation. Maybe I'm just sort of getting at an alternative way to think about motivation that doesn't involve the pressure of an end goal, which involves measures of success and failure.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, one quick question, and then we'll wrap it up, because we're going a little bit long here. But you and I are both used to talking at ends. So right now you have your dissertation coming up. So you have 2 years to prepare and write this, right? Which is a goal, right? Like that's a goal specific to that.
Goal. Yep.
But the breakdown potentially can come, and my question is, now that you're looking at it a little bit differently, differently. I view the university experience you've had, perhaps falsely, having not done the same experience that you're going through by a mile, right? But you're constantly getting your skills sharpened. You're constantly getting feedback, and you're constantly competing against your peers.
Yeah.
And now you have this long, perhaps 2-year window with much less of that. So it becomes more on you, and you have to internalize a lot more of that.
Yeah.
So have you thought about or adjusted your strategy to be able to accomplish that goal?
No, that's a high stakes question for me.
All right, folks. Well,
the end.
No, just really briefly. I think time is a great motivator too, and sharpener of instinct and your sense of imperative. And 2 years seems like a long time, but it's going to melt away easily. And if I can convey anything from the age of 28 looking back, man, if you're in your early 20s, hit the gas now.
Isaac, turn up the volume.
Yeah, just sort of amplify everything you're doing, because every day matters, every hour matters, right? It's not trivial or frivolous stuff. It involves serious commitment. So I'm trying to internalize that and sort of live that through the dissertation. As far as strategy goes, it's the calendar is your friend.
Yeah.
Try to as far as writing, try to carve out 5 or 6 hours a day and just sit down, and you're going to be doing this activity for 5 or 6 hours a day. And that's it, man.
Discipline, industrious.
Somehow glue your ass to that seat and get it done.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Shawn.
Thank you very much.
We would love to have you back, perhaps in a year, or some other point down the road, whenever you have time.
When I accomplish something, how about?
But we can follow up, because I'd love to hear your insight. Because you're just beginning this process now, and hear how it's going midway.
Of course.
Is that something we could set up?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks, Shawn.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you next week.